Jimmy, I gotta take a dump.
What?
No, I mean I need a dumpster.
Well, for all those needs, you need to call Big V Dumpster Rental, Long Island, New York, 631-900-DUMP.
I was going to ask, was Dick Murdoch a good guy? I mean, on
He
kind of
was,
playing card.
Dickie was like totally like he lived and died the business. That's the only personality he had. That's all you ever
Right.
see, all you ever get. He was very,
Right.
very good when he wanted to be out in the ring. He was psychology unbelievable, but he was hard as hell to get along with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I used to, I was used to those. That's kind of some bitches I was raised with. So
Yeah.
it was no big deal to me. You know what I mean? He
Yeah,
was just a
okay.
hard ass, and everything he did, he made everything. He was like, but I mean, he got me booked in Japan. He did a lot of stuff for me too, like that. But Dickie was a hard guy to get along with sometimes.
I always felt that Watts was a genius. When Vince put together the WWE network a little over a decade ago, I finally got to really dive into a lot of what Watts did, and I loved his programming. I really did.
Yeah.
Do you feel that obviously you had to deal with Ole, but Bill was such an important part of your career. How would you say you were with him behind the scenes those years as you were having that awesome
Well,
run?
let me tell you what happened with me and Bill, and I ain't got no hard feelings for Bill Watts, but it was a hard one on me. I was a young guy. I was 20 something, right? I was 20 years old first time I worked in the main event Superdome. You know what I mean? Like it was just whoa.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I had my big break and I got my chance and Watts made that happen. He's the one that gave me the loaded boot. He come up with all this shit and pushed me on his TV and all that. But then my dad, living in Texas, which Watts' TV went into Texas, started running shows. And back then they called it opposition. And he wanted to be, I told my, why do you want, he started running towns, helping Joe Blanchard on some spot shows. Then he got into it and started running his own towns. But he couldn't realize, because he wasn't one of the guys, he didn't live it every day, that he was killing me because Bill Watts, he said, your dad's running one of my towns on your day off and you're the main event, huh? He said, I'm pushing your ass on TV, putting all this money into you, and you're over there running opposition against me, and
Right.
I using my TV.
Right.
And so, we had this big old thing, and then me and Watts almost got into it in interviews one day. He goes, you know what? He said, you can choose your daddy or choose me. I said, are you fucking kidding me? You asking me to choose my dad? You or my dad? You can kiss me. So we almost got into it. But, I was young. If I would have thought, but, how do you tell your dad, hey, dumbass, quit doing this? I wish I would have been able to, but I couldn't because he's a pretty big rugged son of a bitch too, know?
You're also
But if he killed me, it hurt me a lot. And I understand if I was Bill Watts, I probably would have done the same thing to me. I would have, it cost me after I left there, the first big break, when we fell out over that, he come to me and goes, hey, all right, look, I got you booked in Charlotte for Ole and for the Crockett's, and you and Scott Irwin, they're going to bring you in, tag you up against the Young Bloods. You're going to take the world titles and be the world tag team title. So I said, okay, let's go. I wanted to get out of there because all this arguing about my dad stuff. I went there and Ole Anderson, it was a big scam. Ole, I was there 5-6 weeks, and the last week I was there, my check, I drove about 3,000 miles. My check was $300.
Wow.
I went in and they split me and Scott up as soon as we got there. When I went in the office, I told Ole, I can't feed my family on it. Here's Ole. I threw a check down the desk. Ole, I can't feed my family on this. He goes, well, let them starve. So I started to come over to Jess. He goes, yeah, you know what? We can get into a fight and don't make a shit, but you're still, next time you won't screw Bill Watts over, will you?
Wow.
And I'm always in Charlotte to move my family. That's the way it was back then. And I understand. I wouldn't have done that to nobody, but I would. But I understand why Watts is pissed. I do. And I there's nothing I can do about it. We can tell your dad what to do. You know what I mean? It's like I couldn't make him stop doing it.
You were put in an impossible situation. Period. That's
Mhm,
an
mhm.
impossible. That's an impossible situation. You can't win there one way or the other. You ain't
No, and
winning.
it took me
So,
5 years to ever get back to where I was making the money I was making before.
well,
Because
there you
you
go.
know, like word of mouth in territory days, what he's on the
Oh yeah.
phone to everybody, and I was buried. It
Yep.
took me a long time to get
Yep.
back. You know,
Yep.
it
Let
did.
me
Yep.
ask
You
you.
know, for
We'll
the
get off Watts in a second, but how was working in that territory, that Louisiana territory? I heard it was a nightmare.
Well, the trips is the killer. You know what I mean? And the trips is the killer. And Bill Watts expected assholes and elbows, and he wasn't kidding. He pushed and pushed, and you would do doubles on Sundays, all kinds of stuff. 300 miles between shots. It was just insane. You know, you'd run your ass off. You know what I mean? But it was he got it on fire with the Free Birds and Dog, man. Set it on.